We'll start with our first speaker for the Power of Waste panel, Jean Bailliard, the General Manager at TerraCycle. Passionate about circular economy, Jean joined TerraCycle Europe 7 years ago. In 2016, he moved to Sydney as Australia-New Zealand General Manager, where he heads up a fast-growing team that operates recycling programs for complex products. Recently has introduced Loop in Australia, a reuse platform set to transform the Australian consumer landscape. Please welcome to the stage, Jean.
There you go, if you click the right one. Thanks, Craig, for the great introduction. When I was told by Paula from GECA that Craig would be moderating, I was pretty happy with it. So yeah, thanks GECA team as well for putting this event together, and people online as well. So I work for a company called TerraCycle, which is a social business with one mission in mind: eliminating the idea of waste. And we indeed believe that every product you buy today can be recyclable or reused. But the reality is that most plastic packaging that you find at the supermarkets are not, and they just end up in landfills. So our first primary area of focus is to give those plastic packaging and products in general a second life. And we do that by partnering with FMCG companies and retailers and have them sponsor the collection, the recycling, and the research that goes behind the work we do. So we collect hundreds of waste streams around the world, whether it is baby nappies in the Netherlands, toothbrushes and toothpaste tubes that are collected here in Australia and turned into community gardens, outdoor gym equipment made from deodorant cans in the UK, ashtrays made of cigarette butts, and even the next Tokyo Olympic podiums. So to go one step further, we also look at ways waste can be incorporated into packaging. And to do that, we work with cleanup organizations around the world, including here in Australia, in Cape York, where we collect plastic from riverways and the ocean. We work on a plastic pellet formulation that then brands can reuse. An example here is Procter & Gamble making the world's first shampoo bottle made of beach plastic. They since then expanded it to other categories like dishwashing liquid and other brands like herbal essences. You can actually find those bottles at Woolies today. So even though making products recyclable and making them from waste is critically important, we also acknowledge the fact that we're not solving the root cause of waste. And this is why we created and launched Loop, which is a zero waste shopping platform currently live in the UK, US, and France, and launching next year in Australia with Woolies. So Loop as a concept is not new. We've actually looked at wisdom from the past with the good old milkman model. And if you think about that model, like the packaging, so the milk bottle was an asset of the dairy company. So they would be financially motivated to make that milk bottle last longer. And then what happened? You can see here, so 1955, disposability, that's an actual ad from Life magazine where you could see families throwing away like, plastic cutleries and plastic plates, which sounds like really crazy today. But back in the day, like we were celebrating the fact that it was saving us time, it was bringing convenience and affordability. So the principle of Loop is to maintain those virtues while solving the waste problem. So how does it work for consumers? You'll be able to buy your product like in store, online as usual, but you will receive them in a reusable format. You pay a small deposit on your packaging, enjoy them as usual, and then you'll be able to return them. So either you get your deliveries picked up or you can drop off your products at store. Loop is then in charge of refunding the deposit, emptying, cleaning the packaging, and sending it back to the brand so that it can be refilled and used again and again. So that change of ownership of packaging from the consumers who honestly don't want to own the empty packaging to back to the manufacturers, like unlocks so many new design and packaging features. We can, example, the Häagen-Dazs ice cream, keep the ice cream frozen longer. Consumers don't get their hands cold when they hold it. Packaging is like generally and objectively more beautiful. We learned that consumers no longer place some of their packaging, like cleaning wipes, under the sink, but they would put them on their bench top. And that's a big win for brands that are still motivated by gaining market share. We also learned that consumers, when going home, tend to empty their packaging into nicer packaging. So why not give that to them in the first place? Brands can go back to their iconic and original format, like Coca-Cola and the glass bottle, or massively innovate and like Ren Skincare using the world's first reusable pump. Every product that so parts that cannot be reused, like a toothbrush head or razor blade, can be removed and sent back to TerraCycle for recycling. In the same mindset of reducing waste, this toothpaste is dehydrated. It's just the right amount for consumers to brush their teeth, and it requires much less water. So to wrap up, the power of disposable item, which is so wasteful, is that it does bring convenience. And the biggest learning for us at Loop is that in order to convert the mass consumers and not just the waste nerds that were here today, is to, one, make this packaging appealing for them and unlock new features, but two, really keeping this convenience. So that's why we want to have a wide range of products available where they already shop. We want to manage the cleaning and refill for them so that they don't have to carry that to the store and have to do it themselves. And lastly, we want to have disposable options wherever they live. So whether it's through municipal bins, offices, and so on. So by making sure that products never become waste in the first place, this is how we can eliminate the idea of waste. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Not only a great idea, I'm fascinated, Loop. Hopefully we'll get to ask some questions about that later. Remember, you can put your questions in the Zoom window and we'll try and pass them on. It is a really interesting way to try and overcome that waste problem. Convenience, as we said, I think as Jess mentioned earlier, convenience is the big enemy in so many cases. How do we overcome that? How do we make the better solution convenient as well? Somebody who's actually been looking at that, or has at least been working with convenience stores. I want to introduce our next guest, who's Chris Collimore, Chief Commercial Officer at Closed Loop. Chris is a commercially minded with a passion for sustainability. He's led regional and global supply chains at Yum Brands and ISS Inc. He now leads commercial development at Closed Loop, pioneering major technology developments that divert once unrecyclable items to a broad-scale, large volume, valued resource use. So please welcome Chris to the stage.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk today on Simply Cups and what we have achieved over the past couple of years. Simply Cups, just making sure that's the one. Simply Cups started as a pioneer, and it really did take a view of the world of, if you build it, they will come. We knew that we weren't going to be able to collect millions of cups in any short period of time, but we knew that we had a technology in the UK that was already being used, and so as a program, we went out there and started trying to solve the problem that everybody knew needed a solution. And actually, part of War on Waste a number of years ago helped to raise that to the general public, and as a consequence, we have seen exponential growth, as you can see in the total cups collected. Now, the challenge that brings is it then brings that into the circular economy. And as we've seen today from a number of speakers, the circular economy has much more complexity to it than the linear model that we're so used to. And in fact, because it goes across a number of decision-making points and people within the buying of it, it can often be a case of that I love the value proposition of the circular economy, but I'm sorry, that's not in my budget, so I can't take that into account. And I have many, many stories of that occurring throughout corporate and government Australia. And in fact, Simply Cups wouldn't be where we are today without significant support of a product stewardship by brands that have actually moved ahead of the curve. 7-Eleven, Muffin Break, the Coffee Club and KFC have absolutely committed to doing things ahead of the conversation on product stewardship before it's become trendy in the media. And that brings me to coming into this space where there's an awful lot of talk out there in governments and in corporate about what they're doing in the commercial space and the circular economy space indeed. Companies love talking about their 2030 plan, their 2050 plan, and to me it all sounds very much like a Holloman episode where you're talking about something happening far out in the never never, and it's the future CEO's problem. There are, in fact, only a recent example this week, there was a listed Australian major company that announced some great programs that they were going to do over the next 5 years, where they were going to reduce a whole range of things by 10 to 20%. And then the following 5 years, they were going to attempt to do 80%. So that's quite a hockey stick. And I think it just goes to the point there where a lot of people like to talk about what they're doing. Not many like to walk, and they typically are probably talking while they're having a coffee in their disposable cup. So it's not about individuals necessarily. It's about, for scale and scale solutions, it's about what happens out in the big world of corporate. There are significantly things occurring across the journey, and it's great to see the ban on waste going to the export. There's certainly lots of political talk and policy and lots of effort being put into to try and change that whole process. That is the key to unlocking scale and solutions from the circular economy. One of the things it does mean, however, is that because we're looking to do things locally, and it's a fact of life that our manufacturing costs, etc., are generally higher than a lot of our Southeast Asian cousins. And so it could have a cost impact, which is then going to have an ongoing impact in terms of the decision-making capability of supporting a circular economy mindset. We need to encourage that as much as we can, because unfortunately, the sad alternative may well be waste to energy, which is better than landfill, but it's still a one-use scenario. And if the problem becomes too big, then that's going to be a politically easy option to do. We at Closed Loop have been working fast on trying to come up with large scalable options. We've had a number of false starts in trying to look at things which were good ideas, but weren't going to have scalable solutions. So we've now got active into roads, where glass is great going to roads. It's been done lots of times and over many years. And in fact, we're relearning that. But we're actually looking at putting other things in the roads, and we just are in the process of putting coffee cups into roads. And we have a range of other products which are very difficult to recycle, where we can make them use and actually replace products within those things, and so they're reusable over and over again. We've developed a plasterboard replacement, and we're very close to getting that done in New Zealand, and we're very active in the investment range in Australia, where we can use multi-layered packaging, which is incredibly difficult to recycle, and we're hopeful very soon to have that board that meets Australian and New Zealand building standards. Working with KFC, we've used things in replacing concrete curbing. We've got curbings in Sydney that have been broken by cars and concrete for 6-7 times over a couple of year period, and we've put in recycled plastic curbing, and it's still there 2 years later and hasn't got a dent on it. So there's real options that can be done at scale, but they need support at a broader level from the corporate and government perspective. And it's not just policy change, it's actually structural change in how things go about to be made in decision-making criteria. So ultimately, my message is that if there's not a leap of faith and there's not more big pioneering scale options that are supported by broader governments and corporate in Australia, with that leap of faith, we could all end up being just floating around in a sea of waste at any rate in some point in time in the not too distant future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Some interesting examples there. I also like the fact that Chris spoke about the fact that, I've had false starts as well. It's, it's often about attempting these things and hitting a wall and going, hang on, what's wrong with this solution? So it's good that he's admitted that. They didn't get perfect every time. I mean, I like the fact he's worked with KFC. I mean, who would have thought what a brilliant solution to the problem of big buckets is to put them on the heads of cricket viewers. I mean, an amazing solution to solve waste problems. No, but it is great to see that we're trying to find solutions to these problems. Our next speaker was going to be Paul Klemenko, CEO of Planet Ark. Unfortunately, he's a little bit under the weather today, but luckily we are being joined by Steve Morris, who is the head of circular economy development at Planet Ark. So somebody who's very much across this issue, and is also founder of Close the Loop as opposed to Closed Loop. So if we can please, hopefully he's online now, if we can cross to Steve Morris.
Thank you very much, Craig. Can you just confirm that you can hear me and see the slide?
I can hear you. Can we see the slide? Yes, we can see the slide and we can hear you. Go ahead, Steve.
Excellent. Thank you, Craig. And yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Fairly short notice for me, but like most of the speakers and those of us viewing, I have such a passion that I'm sure it'll be easy enough to get in the groove quickly. Hello to Veena, Chris, and John, my colleagues there. The power of waste. Let's have a look at the definition of waste and the phrase, what a waste. Isn't it interesting that, that waste is really a lost opportunity? But waste is not present in nature. You know, so why do we have it? Why do we have plastics in our oceans? And it's pretty much because waste is a result, an outcome of a linear economic model where design hasn't been considered at the earliest stage. The three major pillars that are really easy to define regarding the transition to circularity include pillar number 1, and perhaps most important, design out waste. Pillar number 2, keep products and materials in circulation for longer. And pillar number 3, build regenerative systems, including business models. I think Paul might have given me this slide to just test me a little bit here, throw me under the bus, because globally, I'm sure we do use 100 billion tonnes of materials every year, but I'm pretty sure that's not per person. So we'll run with 100 billion tonnes per year between all of us. And 2/3 of that raw material is squandered. Now, just think of the embodied energy and all of the effort and money and resources that have gone into those products and materials sitting in landfill. As Australians, we generate about 2.5 tonnes of waste each per annum. That's equivalent to 2 small cars each. And by the way, we only recycle about just over 50% of our waste in Australia. Now, the power of collaboration, Planet Ark has been given the opportunity and the responsibility to build Australia's circular economy hub. And that circular economy hub has a mission, and the mission is to enable Australia's transition to a circular economy, to assist, to guide. Part of that transition includes handling waste, and I'll focus on that for the last minute here, and the elements of the Australian Circular Economy Hub that are relative to waste, and that is pretty much all of it, although waste and recycling is only a small part of the transition to circularity. But we are building a marketplace. We're partway through scoping out what that marketplace for products and materials of recycled content will look like. May I say that we are not about reinventing the wheel. We're about collaborating with existing marketplaces. It may be a mall type approach where you walk in through the Australian Circular Economy Hub and there you see marketplaces for the materials and the products that are relevant to your industry. So that's the marketplace. Circular procurement being mentioned today, absolutely essential as far as we at Planet Ark are concerned, that the top priority is to build resilient markets for products of recycled content, and then the infrastructure will follow. Metrics. We are measuring circularity at the Australian Circular Economy Hub, and we are collaborating with the states to make sure that the states, as they start to measure circularity, and many are, that we're using the same data sets and the same metrics so that we can create an Australian circularity gap report and indeed feed into the global circularity gap report. Then we've got priority sectors. We need to choose the coalition of the willing. Which industries, which materials, or indeed which value chains are most ripe for collaborating on the transition to circularity. Planet Ark's famous for its awareness raising and its education, and that's a big part of what the Australian Circular Economy Hub will be bringing to the table, largely through the central hub, which is being built right now, and as you can see here, we'll be launching on the 24th of November. That central hub is all about curating and connecting. It's about collaborating. It's about building a collective intelligence, meeting, knowledge sharing, etc. So that's Planet Ark. I thank you for the opportunity today. Look forward to answering some questions and getting involved with the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. You did a great job stepping into the void there. I appreciate it a great deal. Our next speaker probably needs very little introduction, but I'll introduce her anyway. It's Veena Sahajwalla, the Laureate Professor at the Smart Centre UNSW. Professor Veena Sahajwalla is an internationally recognised materials scientist, engineer and inventor revolutionising recycling science. She's renowned for pioneering the high-temperature transformation of waste in the production of a new generation of green materials. In 2008, Veena launched the world's first e-waste microfactory, and in 2019, she launched her plastics microfactory. And she's also, in 2019, was appointed the inaugural director of the Circular Economy Innovation Network by the New South Wales Government through its Office of Chief Scientist and Engineers. So I think definitely Veena will know what a circular economy is. Please welcome her to the stage.
Thank you very much, Craig, for that very kind introduction. And I'd like to also thank GECA. It's been absolutely a privilege to be here amongst some incredible people who are really sort of, in a way, challenging us to I suppose, think differently. And that's really what our work at Smart Centre and of course, the whole sort of Circular Economy Innovation Network is all about. As you've heard, we are, of course, with the Circular Economy Network, is very much about thinking about innovation and science and how a lot of these new ideas can actually change practices. And I'm not going to repeat what a lot of my esteemed colleagues have already said. You get that. We all get that. I think the important question for all of us is going to be that if we've got all of these materials already present in our economy, and if we are absolutely reliant on these types of products, how are we going to possibly look at this entire stockpile, if I can put it this way, right? And I wanted to actually show you a stockpile. So in this case, unfortunately, I think the audience can't see this, but imagine a mega stockpile of waste tires. And of course, as you can appreciate, it's not out of this world to imagine that we all have had opportunities to, I know I've sort of damaged a tire or two in my life. And of course, we all do. So the realities are, as much as we talk about designing out waste, we have to take all of this into a holistic context, as in we've got to understand the waste, the materials, its functionality. But the most important thing in all of this, of course, is manufacturing. So asking the question, how do you make materials? How do you make products? If we are going to have a future where recycling, circular economy, and the most sophisticated way of thinking about materials coming back to life over and over again happens, you can't exactly sort of go, well, whether it's a bus or a car, that I'm going to drive it without tires, right? So, I mean, let's sort of get that fact straight. We know we've all got our phones, our electronic devices, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to just kind of lay the foundation just to talk about how the work at the Smart Centre is really all about understanding circular economy when we can actually relate materials to manufacturing to products that come into our hands that go right back into manufacturing again. So imagine a future where all of our mobile phones, our electronic devices, all of these expensive materials that go into making our devices come back to life over and over again. Because of course, you know very well that once you make materials, even if the product becomes obsolete, those products don't actually, even those products with the materials in them, the materials don't actually ever die. And what I mean by that is if I tell you that all the copper in a car, for example, is something that can be recycled for as long as we want. So metals, as an example of a material, is recyclable forever. Now that didn't just happen overnight. I mean, we didn't, we take for granted that metals like steel can be recycled over and over again, and copper and so on. There's a lot of science and innovation that goes into making that possible. And I guess the realities are, when we think about a car, you can almost sort of go, right, okay, we recycled steel, but let's stop using plastics in cars. Now, is that really feasible? Not really. So I guess the reason why I'm making that point is when cars are manufactured, the reason why plastics went into making cars in the first place is because they actually reduce weight of a car. You can't exactly say, well, I'm not going to have all that fabulous glass windows, the laminated glass, all of that in my car. Safety glass and all of these types of products are designed to keep us safe. So what we have to ask is, products are obviously designed, and people have used the word people-centric and human-centric. Absolutely, we've got to bear that in mind. But we also have to bear in mind that our products become more and more sophisticated. We need to think about, therefore, recycling and manufacturing right here in Australia in a far more sophisticated manner. And that means we've got to not only do the collection, but we've got to understand how we're going to remanufacture this over and over again. So I wanted to just take you through a few different examples. When I mentioned copper, of course, is an example of a metal that's there in electronic devices, but you could almost sort of say, well, if we're going to be all driving around hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles, it's not just about the simple metals. And there's nothing simple about copper. It is a very sophisticated metal without getting into the details. But there are so many other materials that make life more interesting, more livable. So we've heard mention of batteries. And again, we've got valuable metals that are present in our batteries. So you can start to then unpack and go, what happens to all the electric vehicles when they come on road and we've got all these batteries that we have to recycle? So we've been funded through the Australian Research Council in really understanding how we bring together recycling and manufacturing. And we've been harnessing and looking at harnessing different types of metals in a way that it all makes sense. But the important point in all of this is, as we've heard over and over again, it's about all of us as also consumers. And we've heard that we need to make the right choices. But sitting somewhere in between all of this ecosystem is our ability to be really clever as manufacturers. So we can actually create jobs that are coming out of the materials that don't just go into landfill, but materials that can be reformed and remanufactured over and over again. And even when the products become obsolete, we go back and we harness those products, bring back those materials, whether it's glass, plastics, or metals, and we can use those forever in our economy. And that's really what ultimately our solutions are all about, is we need to think about creating value out of our materials. So these materials have been undervalued because we simply go, too hard, can't be recycled, no, they must end up in landfill. So the idea and the reason why I wanted to bring up one of these, and unfortunately for the audiences sitting at home are not going to be able to see this, but I did bring this little product here, because I'm sure Craig will remember from a couple of years ago when we were, in fact, doing a bit of footage in our microfactories, and we had our plastic filaments that had been made out of 100% recycled plastics. And I think you might remember that he was wearing these beautiful glasses. That's it, perfect. So now I thought, well, we might show to Craig that we've actually made something that's a little bit more complicated than just making glasses. Not that glasses are easy to make by any means, but the reason why I want to show some of these more sophisticated parts is what it actually goes to show, that the 100% waste that we sourced out of the plastic supply chain where this material has come from is all out of the waste PPE plastic. And we know how much of that is available. Now imagine if that plastic could be reformed into a brand new filament that could then be fed into 3D printers and could all be done in a local microfactory. So you've suddenly got a situation where these materials are now just not materials that are, oh my gosh, it's waste PPE. Oh, good Lord, we got to burn it because it's contaminated. That would be a waste of this valuable plastic, right? But imagine if you could have the right manufacturing conditions that took care of the bugs, took care of the materials, manufactured new products. What you need is that clever science that underpins the transformation in our economy. And that's really what this is all about. It's about not just what we're using, is how we make it, how we put it into our economy, and how we bring these products back to life over and over again. And imagine if these types of microfactories were available to us all through the country, and we had localized ability to take waste, not transport it over thousands of kilometers, but take waste in your local regions, make these value-added products, help local manufacturers make things so that we can actually take care of supply chains locally, and of course, contribute in a positive, meaningful way to our economy. Because imagine if you could source sophisticated parts, I think someone mentioned repairability today, you could actually repair all your complex machinery, all your equipment. So we would talk about plant and equipment and making things. Remember, we've got to think the whole of supply chain. How do you actually make equipment? How do you actually make products so you can put it back into production over and over again? So I wanted to just show you a few examples of products that we have indeed been making. We've been making products as an alternative to ceramics, and we've been doing that as a combination of waste textiles and waste glass. So yes, the two unlikely partners, a hard glass combined with textile to create green ceramics. And all of this without getting into the details of how we do it. The important point in this is, yes, you can take a combination of waste materials and manufacture products that still meet the specifications. So that's the important thing. It's about producing quality products. And the way you produce quality products is about understanding manufacturing and measuring performance. So it's doing the science, measuring performance, and understanding whether it's fit for purpose. That's the important thing. Is it fit for purpose? And I guess that then takes us to that whole important question. Is it going to ultimately enable economies to flourish? That's really the whole point. Are we able to make these kinds of products while delivering economic value and doing it in a way that makes business sense? And all of this has to be part of the conversation. So we've shown through some of our microfactories where we've manufactured these filaments that we're talking about and shifting the dial in the way we think about more sophisticated products and making these plastic products through various solutions. So I wanted to ultimately just finish up. You're seeing a picture of a microfactory. And again, I think Craig will probably remember this because that's where we were doing a bit of that filming. And we are now running these microfactories at UNSW. But I'm also pleased to say, in finishing off in my last slide, that there are so many incredible businesses, big and small, in Australia who actually want to be proactive in doing the right thing. Embracing science and innovation does take courage, particularly if you're going to be the first one to embrace that science and innovation outside a university and a research environment. So the fact that we've not only established these microfactories at UNSW, but we also have some incredibly amazing industry partners who've taken on these microfactories and doing a lot of this manufacturing, giving it a go, but also equally understanding how the science works, that's important. So I think, to me, we're really clever in Australia. We need to be really clever in leading the charge, showing the rest of the world that these materials are not waste, they are resources. They're resources waiting to be harnessed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Veena. That does look very impressive, the new 3D printing model. What is it? Is it actually something that was just an impressive shape?
We were actually exploring all kinds of parts in a machinery without giving away too many secrets.
Okay. Veena will never give away the secrets. That's the unfortunate thing. All right, we'll come back to that in a second. I want to ask you, John, first about Loop.
Yes.
Which is coming to Australia 2021.
Correct.
Hopefully. And it's already been rolled out in some countries overseas. How effective, what's the take-up been like? If people are taking
So it's still pretty recent. So we launched a loop in France and the US first, so Paris and east coast of the US in May 2019. So there's still like a lot of learning. This week we are rolling out the in-store model. So it used to be online only, and we'll be experimenting loop in a store environment. And right, like the uptake is pretty good. So we have 100,000 users around those 3 countries. We recently launched with Tesco in the UK, and then we'll have Canada, Japan, and Australia next year.
Great. So people are taking to it.
Yes.
And kind of sticking with it once they've taken it up as well.
Yes. Yeah, pretty good.
And is it going to be, what's the price of it? Is it more expensive? Is it kind of similar?
So we try to stay similar to a normal like consumer good product, and the price is really decided by the brands. So they do their own study, and the idea is to make it on par. The only difference is that you would be paying a small deposit that obviously you get refunded. For some products that are completely different because they have more features to it, and I showed a few examples like ice cream containers, the price may be like 10 to 20% more expensive. But consumers realize that there is more benefit to it.
Yeah, great. Oh, it would be fascinating to see. A question for Veena. How far away do you think we are from having microfactories in our own homes or communities? Maybe communities is the first step.
Yeah, I wouldn't actually advocate having it in your own home. Although it's interesting, of course, when you look at the sort of finishing end of what you can do with 3D printers, it's becoming really common. So people can, of course, print parts in their own home, if you can imagine that. Now, that's an invention that's already there. It's that feedstock, plastic filaments that are then made out of recycled plastics. So you can imagine some of those finishing items at community centers, at small businesses, absolutely feasible. But even the plastic filaments that we have, which operates in about 50 square meter space, there's no reason why you can't have community centers in places where, for instance, some of the plastics is already being collected. They're not all kinds of plastics that can be transformed in this way. But we already do have some of the microfactories that are operating in regional towns. So one example is out at Cootamundra. So yeah, I guess from my point of view, the fact that we've had a few already in development, some that we've kickstarted, and some that we will probably be announcing not too in the distant future.
Not going to give it away as usual. Yeah, Chris, I'll come to you first on this one, and then Steve as well. Come to you this, but you can all answer this. And Chris, I guess you talked about the fact that it takes some companies stepping ahead to kind of actually undertake the hassle of getting into it and the experimentation. There's a question here. What do you think is the biggest barrier and the biggest opportunity to take circular economy to the next level? I'll come to you first on that, Chris.
The biggest barrier is having products which actually meet at scale existing alternatives that are either beat or meet the specification and are commercial in price. It all comes down to price in the end. There's a small market, niche market that will pay a premium, but ultimately if you want scale, it's got to meet everything that you need at the right price.
But I guess that's the interesting thing about price, is that what we don't factor in the price is we don't really factor in the price of waste. We don't factor in the price of taking a material, putting it in landfill, not using it again. That kind of social cost or environmental cost isn't factored in. So do we need kind of more of a policy leadership that actually tries to factor that in to make it so that if you are doing the right thing in recycling, that there's a benefit there, or that's taken into consideration? I'll come to you on that, Steve.
Yes,
I'm hoping you're still there.
Yes, I am, Craig. Look, the biggest barrier, as I see it, is the lack of resilient markets for products of recycled content. You know, we can have all of the infrastructure that we like, but if there aren't resilient markets there, there's a bit of a stigma attached to products of recycled content. And I think over the last 20 years, we've come from a space of perhaps poor quality being associated with recycled content. Whereas in today's day and age, like Tonoplast is an asphalt additive, for example, that improves the performance of a road. It's not recycling unless you're improving the performance of the virgin product that you're replacing. So that's the barrier. And the opportunity for me, Craig, is is that it's not so much an opportunity, it's that we don't have a choice. We live on a planet of finite resources. Our population is growing, and we all want a certain quality of life, and we all need food, and we all need jobs. That's just a hiding to nothing if we model our success on GDP and some of these outdated measures that we're using at the moment.
Yes, indeed. Chris, I mean, is that the case for you? So, for instance, putting coffee cups into the roads, does that increase the quality?
Absolutely, it actually replaces imported material, and was shown in our testing. We're just waiting to get all approved. That actually improves the performance of the road. And so that's one of the key things, is that it's about leadership, both in a company level or corporate level or government level. Yes, absolutely. There's a price involved in terms of allowing for the treatment of waste at the end. But what it still comes down to drive scale is if those companies that are actually trying to do the right thing are not rewarded for it in some way, shape or form by their markets growing or consumers being willing to pay, then they're going to say, why should we continue to do it?
Yeah, and I guess that's an interesting question. It comes back to, Trevor Evans addressed this right at the beginning and talked about the fact that it's going to pass a bill. It's going to say we can't send this waste overseas. Do you think that's going to change the underlying economies for these particular products? I'll open that up to anyone.
I absolutely think it will, and it should, because I think if as a society, like we're saying, we value our materials and we're clever enough to bring a lot of new science and innovation into manufacturing, then, we can't just give up at the first step and go, oh, well, it's all too hard. I think, to me, that's really where innovation and the science and technology and, of course, partnership between researchers and businesses plays such an important role, because not everything is always easy. It's the example I guess I'd like to use is if you think about metals and people assume, oh, it's all perfectly recyclable now, but it does take a lot of effort in terms of research to refine and to get the right quality. So in the same way, if we're talking about quality plastics or quality glass for a different application, you've got to know how to apply that science so that you can put it out into a product format that then, of course, has to meet the standards and specifications. But you can't give up right at the start and go, well, now it's all too hard, I'm just going to bury it. And I think, to me, that's where the role of a lot of that clever science and engineering has to come in to enable businesses. And of course, we all know that you can be the first in the world because there's where the risk and reward factors come in, to have that kudos of being a world leader in a certain area.
I guess it comes back, though, because you can ban sending these waste overseas, but if it turns out to still just be cheaper to bury it in Australia than to recycle it, we have this problem. I mean, I guess TerraCycle deals with this. You try and recycle a lot of products that ordinarily there's not necessarily a market there for, and you're asking for the product stewardship to basically pay for that kind of thing.
Right.
Do you think there needs to be more encouragement to see that happen on a wider scale?
Of course. No, definitely.
Or does it happen overseas? I mean, TerraCycle is kind of global.
Yeah.
Do you see that happen much more?
It's always like voluntary, so the brands will be voluntary, like paying for the collection and the recycling. And I think to your previous question, it would be great to incentivize them, and they do it because it's the right thing, but they also understand that consumers are asking for it. And I think we have a responsibility as consumers to, and someone touched base on that earlier, is to choose the right product, like vote with your dollars and be vocal with brands that would be doing it on a voluntary basis.
Yeah. Okay. So, sorry.
And there is a number of that. So there's two components in that, the average consumer will have $10 to spend. And if they've got $10 to spend and they've got to decide what they've got to spend it on, then the natural inclination of economics is they're going to buy the cheapest thing, and whether that's from China or virgin product or not. And so that's why the whole focus has to be on at a company level and a government level in terms of driving the use of products at a scalable position that in the base of the hierarchy puts it into large scale usage that is still competitive at the end game. As that builds and swallows up some of the large components of waste, there's then opportunities to grow price premiums for sustainable products.
But I think also there's another important issue, isn't it, in all of this? I mean, if consumers have transparency in terms of the information, and if people know that by purchasing products that are made locally out of local recycled content, it's not just about recycling, it's also about that all important question around creating local jobs. So the fact that something has been manufactured
locally in Australia out of recycled content is not just about reducing carbon footprint, although that's kind of the obvious thing that I think you talk about, Craig, but also that all important sort of, layer on top of that, as we're sitting right here in COVID times, we have to also layer upon all of that is, are we going to encourage more businesses to manufacture these products locally, therefore create local jobs? So I think part of this, when we talk about price, is also to put that information in a transparent manner in front of consumers.
Which comes back, I guess, to the first panel we had today, which is talking about labels. And that's, well, I talk to consumers. They're very overwhelmed by the decisions they have to make. And I can see why. It's extremely complex. And you kind of go, can we come up with a simple approach to labels so that people understand this is better for jobs? This is, this is the premium you're paying. And I guess that's it. And the problem, I guess, at the moment is because so many of these are voluntary and the government's not supporting it, is you get these great, GECA and all others, you get these great brands that create these labels, but they then don't have the funding to actually really promote it to a level where it becomes widespread, that everybody understands it. We kind of need that kind of support to actually get it out there further.
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, maybe I'm obviously preaching to the converted here, but I'd love to imagine that just like we talk about now, we see with food, where people start to understand how much of that food is actually grown in Australia. I'd love to imagine a future where we can imagine a label where we can talk about, manufactured content in Australia. So, people should be able to go, oh, well, okay, if I purchase this product, 75% of this is made in Australia. And I think, to me, again, that's going to enable a conversation, and on a perfect day like today, to mention about, sort of labeling what we could be doing.
I bring Steve back in here. I guess, obviously the consumers are hard because it's a large amount of people to get to and it's difficult. Often there's more bang for buck, I guess, focusing on procurement and focusing on people that are doing the big purchases there. The Australian Circular Economy Hub, is that focused more consumers or procurement or government? Where's that going to be mainly aimed at, Steve?
It's a broader brush than that, Craig, because the transition to circularity is a complete change of mindset, and so therefore it impacts all elements of our society, from individuals through to groups and businesses, local governments, regions, states, countries, and then the whole globe. So the transition to circularity is not specific to one particular sector. If I may come back and just address the question of cost, and one way that we can, I believe anyway, that we can transition more quickly to a circularity, especially around recycling. And again, I apologise for focusing on recycling. It is only one small element of circularity, but it seems to be today's favourite topic. And the cost of goods sold is incorrect at the moment, because we're not factoring in the externalities of impacts to climate change, the fact that we're using finite materials, fresh air, clean air, and clean water. And if these externalities were actually put back as costs onto virgin raw materials, you'd find a much more competitive market for those recycled products where the embodied energy and all those impacts are already there.
Absolutely. Has anybody seen any government working towards costing those externalities and putting it in place? Anyone? No, I don't think so. All right, there's been a lot of positive things in this, but let's see. Yeah, we'll have to unfortunately wrap it up there. Please thank all my panelists, Jean, Chris, Steve, and Veena. A great panel, a great conversation. So many more questions coming in. Unfortunately, we can't get to them. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back with our last panel for the day. Thank you again to our panelists.